Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our first panel, our plenary panel of the conference. Then we're going to have breakout panels, as you can see on your programs, on the different issues. I'm very happy to introduce this very illustrious panel on the lessons from Madrid and the way forward for Arab-Israeli peacemaking, which is the basic theme of this conference. We're truly honored to have His Royal Highness Prince Turki Al Faisal with us. All of the biographies of our distinguished panelists are in your programs. I will not go into the details. His Excellency Eitan Ben-Sur, the former Director General of the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who was with us at Madrid. Nabil Shat of the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, who's had so many positions in the Palestinian Authority that I can't even enumerate them. Welcome. And of course, Nimrod Novik, whom we've been working very closely with from the early days, who has been the chairman of the ECF and has been involved in, on the Israeli side in peacemaking and has a certain great expertise on the economic development aspects of peace. So, gentlemen, welcome to this conference and welcome to this panel. What I'd like to do is to lead the discussion, and I hope this will be a discussion, is to ask some basic, each one of you some basic questions, and please feel free to talk to one another and express your views as you will. I think the first question I'd like to ask, and Your Royal Highness, I will start with you, if you don't mind, is what do you think the major contribution of the Madrid Conference was to Arab-Israeli peace negotiations, if you had to summarize the historic context, Your Royal Highness?
First of all, I'd like to thank Ambassador Girigian for inviting me here, and Secretary Baker. Also, just at the coffee session after his talk, somebody said Secretary Baker should become the next representative of the President to the Middle East. And my reply to that is I will work for him to become President of the United States. That way he can appoint whoever he wants to the Middle East. Contribution Madrid definitely had, as the Secretary pointed out, the distinct accomplishment of having Arabs and Israelis sitting at the same table, but not just at the same table, but talking to each other. And that led the way to the other developments that happened afterwards, whether it was Oslo or the negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis, even the negotiations between the Syrians and the Israelis, if you remember, during the Clinton years, and subsequent developments as well. Culminating in the last meeting between these Arabs and Israelis in Annapolis under George W. Bush's administration. So from that perspective, I think it was a breakthrough. Other breakthroughs, of course, that came from that development were the multi-party talks that, if you remember, were held at several different capitals in the Arab world, I think in Morocco and in Qatar. Alas, the breakup of the Oslo discussions led to the breakup of the multilateral talks. So from those angles as well, Madrid was quite an accomplishment. I don't have much anecdotal storytelling to tell you about those days, as the Secretary was mentioning before. But as an observer, and at the time I was a Director of Intelligence, I also gauged the public reaction, not just in the kingdom, but within the Arab and Islamic world. And Madrid seemed to be, to the general public, as not just a serious attempt to bring an end to this tragic and bloody conflict, but also one that held within it a great deal of hope and potential. And from that perspective, everybody was expecting something to happen after Madrid. And so from that perspective as well, I think as America came out of the Gulf War and evicting Saddam's forces from Kuwait, the level of support for America in the Arab and Islamic world probably was at its highest ever. And since then, things have turned otherwise.
Thank you, Royal Highness. Eitan, your perspectives.
Personally, I regard the Madrid conference and the Madrid process as one of the most important events in the history of the State of Israel since the attainment of its independence. And the same goes for the history of the Middle East, because it was for the first time that mechanism was set in order for Israel to enter into negotiation with the entire Arab world. And I think that what was extremely important is the leadership, vision, and diplomatic prowess that was provided by Secretary Baker that made this unique opportunity workable. And thanks to him, this opportunity was not missed but fully utilized. And the big advantage of Madrid is that the three elements of peace, security, and territory were interwoven. The concept is unified. One cannot have success without addressing the two major other elements. Another very important notion that I believe the American administration or Secretary Baker introduced was the call for fairness, for recognizing the basic interest, the inherent interest in the peace agreement for everybody concerned, and the element of compromise. As President Bush said, and he also mentioned it in his speech in Madrid, it is a process of give and take, a compromise. And one has to realize that if you enter into a process without realizing that you have to make some compromise, the process will be doomed by definition. So I believe that the Madrid process was perhaps, and maybe we will further elaborate, the sole opportunity to bring the Middle East into the mold and into the framework of, at some point, achieving full comprehensive peace.
And thank you, Eitan. I know in Secretary Baker's book, The Politics of Diplomacy, he notes that you and he, at the end of the Madrid Peace Conference, came and shook each other's hands, and you told the Secretary, "My God, we've done it." There was even surprise at that last moment, but my God, we've done it. Your Excellency, Nabil Shah, your perspectives on Madrid.
Well, Madrid really was very important for the Palestinians. I think it's the first time we felt that the United States is there, will stay the course, will make everything possible, will equalize the great imparity of power between us and the Israelis. The negotiations do not work when the two parties have such great imparity unless a third party comes in fairly but strongly with the marvelous ability to make an architecture that will accommodate all the points of view. We lost in Madrid several things, but they were willing to accept that the PLO was not there, that people from Jerusalem were not there, although that was somehow worked in, that somebody from a noble family from Jerusalem who lives in Jordan can be a member of, I mean, all the maneuvers that you were able to do finally succeeded. But you were very clear on end of occupation. You were very clear about denouncing settlements. You were very clear about our rights in East Jerusalem. Your letter of assurance, I think, was the single most important document that the Palestinians received from the United States, that the United States made everything possible to make it implementable. And that is why we accepted to go without Yasser Arafat. We were proud of Haidar Abdel-Shafi, by the way. I was not allowed inside the meetings. I could not even go into Hotel Victoria, where the delegation was, and I had to be in bars and café trottoir around Victoria, and members of the delegation like Hanan or others would surreptitiously come to see me. But we accepted that. We were willing to accept that for Palestine, because the compromise was worthwhile. That this is where the real problem will be tackled. And when you came with this $10 billion loan guarantee deal, I think you made it very clear to us that the United States is serious and that we have to take our responsibility as well. The problem today is exactly that. Settlement go on forever, and there's absolutely no punishment, no reprimands. But we seek a membership in the UNESCO, we get our funds cut off. That is something you made clear will not happen. And I think that was a major reason why we adopted Madrid, why we went out of Madrid to Oslo. And I can attest to the years of Arafat and Rabin, where real normalization took place, where a real hope was built, and where I can say that peace between Arabs and Israelis, between Palestinians and Israelis, is doable. I have seen it done. Now, what happened afterwards, I think, should be on the next question.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Nimrod, your perspectives.
You know, in the never resolved debate between what makes history, circumstances or the individual, from the parochial perspective that I observe those events and look at them with hindsight, I would say that the individual won hands down. I think that Secretary Baker was more humble than warranted by describing the circumstances that made it possible for the U.S., for President Bush 41 and himself to make it happen. And, you know, in hindsight, we always look at the environment and we say, well, you know, look at it. This happened and this happened and this happened, and therefore we succeeded. I submit that we probably would have had the same circumstances or the same explanation for success had previous or subsequent administrations stood up for the principles that administration upheld at the time with the same resolve. So yes, we say the Soviet Union was shaky and the Gulf War was success, and Saddam Hussein and Israeli security, and so on and so on and so forth. I think historians would have found equally persuasive case to be made for an American success should it take place under different circumstances. From my perspective, it was primarily the presidential backing and the Secretary of State using the American soft power in a most effective way with the players in the region. And I just want to illustrate it with just one example. The Madrid concept was quite creative and interesting, and certainly proved tremendously useful. The bilateral nature of the negotiation over peace and the multilateral nature of the supportive framework for regional issues. Again, looking at it from a very parochial Israeli perspective, it was perfect. It's what we needed, reassurances, with all the weight of fears that Israelis carry that do not seem to be out of sync with the awesome power that Israel does have in regional terms, and I'm not talking security only. Nonetheless, we do care, we do shoulder historical filters through which we see the world, and we're not that secure as we perhaps should be. So this framework gave us the recognition that we were seeking and so on. Quite a similar concept was rejected by the same Prime Minister Shamir only a couple of years earlier. In 1987, there was an agreement between then Prime Minister Peres and King Hussein of Jordan, the London Agreement of April 87, which spoke about an international conference and had all the caveats on the conference. I mean, the conference was castrated of any imposing ability, of any ability to veto agreement, precisely as eventually the Madrid conference presented. And the same Yitzhak Shamir said now, and a previous US administration say, well, okay, so no. And that was the end of that. Now, things happened since. We had the first Intifada, we had the Gulf War, we had a few things happening in the region that we can attribute the change in the Shamir position to. But I think we will be not giving, due weight to the American position. So I want to summarize this part of my contribution by suggesting that there are two schools that we from the region, from, again, the parochial Israeli perspective, there are two views of US policy over the last 20, 30 years of Middle East peace. And you can encapsulate them with two bumper stickers. One says, the United States cannot want peace more than the parties themselves. The other one says, peace in the Middle East is in the strategic interest of the United States. And they're very, very different. And what we've seen in Madrid is a president and a secretary of state saying peace in the Middle East is in the strategic interest of the United States, and the parties had no choice but to go along.
Thank you very much, Nimrod. If and when we get to the point where Arab-Israeli peace negotiations can be resumed, the Secretary gave his prognosis on that, is there a place for a Madrid II model? By that I mean the Madrid model, which is basically direct face-to-face negotiations in one channel seconded by multilateral track that dealt with water, environment, arms control, refugees, and economic development. Should a Madrid II formula be replicated in future negotiations, based, of course, on the fundamental bilateral negotiations being face-to-face and direct? So, Nabil, let me start with you on that.
On negotiations?
Yes.
Well, I think negotiations should always universally have two very important requirements so that they can continue. One is that if you agree on terms of reference, they don't change. You stick to these terms of reference, because that's the architecture of the whole exercise. And secondly, if you do agree on anything, you implement it. And so after 20 years of negotiations, you see almost all the aspects that were in the Madrid conference, from land for peace, 242, 338, end of settlement, all of this had vanished. These are no more the terms of reference that Israel accepts. It wants a totally new set of terms of reference. And all the agreements that were signed in Oslo, and after Oslo, including the roadmap, are not being implemented. And item 1 of the requirements of Israel was a total stop to settlement, including natural growth. I think on the other side, we, the Palestinians, implemented every one of the 10 items that we were required to do. And I think we've done extremely well with maintaining security in the West Bank and moving to a totally non-violent policy of working for our goals. So I think to go to negotiations is absolutely necessary. I don't think you can ever get any conclusion without negotiations. But these negotiations were called in the letter of assurances of Secretary Baker meaningful, genuine negotiations. To have meaningful and genuine negotiations, you need a time shape, and Madrid put that time shape very clearly. 1 year to agree on the modalities of self-government, 5 years of interim period. In the second year, you start permanent negotiations. By the end of the 5 years, you have ended the negotiations successfully, hopefully, and therefore the total amount of time was 6 years. Now it's 20 years. And therefore, to go back to negotiations, which is absolutely necessary, without it we cannot get a final agreement. We cannot get real peace. But to get to it, we need a minimum credibility of these negotiations. And that minimum credibility lies in the two requirements that I just mentioned. Without them, I think it will be impossible to achieve anything. We'll spend 20 more years while our land are being grabbed. There will be nothing to negotiate. In fact, I think that's what Mr. Shamir said after he accepted to go to Madrid. I'll go to Madrid, I'll negotiate for 10 years. In the meanwhile, I'll build settlement in the West Bank and Gaza. There will be very little to negotiate after 10 years. Mr. Netanyahu was just doing the same.
Thank you, Nabil. This subject of terms of reference is critical. I'd like to get the Israeli perspective on this, first with Eitan and then with Nimran, and then I would like to ask Prince Turki bin Faisal a question that's related to this. So Eitan, on terms of reference.
I wouldn't like to get into any argument with...
No, but please go ahead.
Because the picture depicted by my good friend is, of course, one-sided, one-dimensional, and it does omit certain historical facts like the far-reaching proposal submitted by Prime Minister Ehud Olmert to President Abbas, far beyond the consensus of Israeli public opinion, and we are still waiting for the reply to come. Maybe it will come one day after reading Mrs. Condoleezza Rice's book. Perhaps we will get the answer. But I think what is more important, and in referring to Mr. Shamir, that he was trying to maneuver for 10 years, I believe that
his statement, not mine.
Never made an official. Maybe it was ascribed to him as if he said that. I think that the process, the mechanism, the meticulous mechanism was far stronger than any personal disenchantment with it. And had it gone its way, perhaps we would have witnessed today an altogether different Middle East. One can elaborate on what could have been achieved. But personally, I think that still the terms of reference of Madrid are in force. May I add that the elaboration of peace by Secretary Baker and President Bush, I think was for the first time all-encompassing diplomatic relations, economic relations, people-to-people development. So it would have been an altogether different Middle East. And those of us who recall what transpired, or how the Middle East looked shortly after Madrid and the activation of the multilateral talks, it was a glimpse of an altogether new Middle East. The entire region was preoccupied with a development project. It was very hopeful. The international business community was very much at the disposal of the political developments, and things could have turned much better if it were not sidetracked by moving to the Oslo option. May I just add one, Mr. Shah, just one remark. I met Dr. Abdul El-Shafi years later in a hotel in Jerusalem because we got very friendly, and he told me, as much as I wanted the PLO to take over and to govern the negotiation, I think that it should have been incorporated in the Madrid process, and we all would have ended up in a much favorable result.
Thank you very much. Nimrod.
We can always look back and inevitably, when looking back, seek to understand who's to blame. Because that's what we do when Israelis and Palestinians, or Israelis and Arabs in general, get together. The first thing we have to go through, it's almost unavoidable. Like it's in the genes. We have to go look back and who's to blame? Who lost more opportunities? I'd rather look at your question looking forward. Mm-hmm. You asked about TORs. I would like to make two comments on this. One, in the breakthrough of the Madrid conference, the structure and the mechanism were critical, and they proved very, very successful. In the next phase, and we have seen so much emphasis on structure and mechanism, who meets with whom, when, rather than who discusses with whom what. So I do share Nabil's premise that clear TORs, terms of reference, are critical for the success of the next phase. I believe that the concept of the second Madrid is already there. The concept is in the Saudi, or later Arab Peace Initiative. I think under the umbrella of the Arab Peace Initiative, you have everything you need to bridge from Madrid to the next phase, provided the navigator starts ruling out issues of discussion. Dreams are out. Practical solutions are in. And create that range where bilateral negotiation, direct negotiation, which is the only way where it's going to happen, but are already somehow grooved into a certain direction whereby flooding Israel with refugees is out. An Israeli expansive definition of blocks is out. And certain things are in. These kind of terms of reference, and I think the Secretary mentioned in passing, didn't even bother to elaborate because it is so common to the milieu that we are talking about, that those terms of reference are basically known to most of us. It just, what is missing is the driving force to put them on the table and urge the parties to stick with them.
Thank you very much, Nimrod. Your Royal Highness, Nimrod mentioned, this was exactly the question I was going to ask you. In terms of reference, one of the most critical terms of reference is what then Crown Prince Abdullah, now King Abdullah, put on the table in the Arab Peace Initiative, which was truly a historic breakthrough in terms that the whole Arab world, all the countries in the Arab League, would recognize Israel in the context of a full and comprehensive Arab-Israeli peace. I mean, huge. Those terms of reference are part of the Madrid legacy. I guess my question is, how long can those terms of reference, the Arab Peace Initiative, remain on the table without progress being made?
Let me start by saying that there should have been a full session about this in this conference. And
I'll take the criticism on that.
And the Arab Peace Initiative definitely, as you say, came from what happened in Madrid. But I will go back with you 10 years earlier to the Fahd plan, which nobody mentions anymore. This was, in my view, the first breakthrough in the Arab position following from Camp David, the first Camp David, when Egypt was ostracized and thrown out of the Arab League and other Arab Muslim organizations, and the Arab world took a position in 1979, 1980 that no peace, etc. But because of that Fahd plan that was presented first in 1981 at the Summit Conference, it didn't go through, basically at the time because of President Assad's objection to it. But subsequently, in 1982, it came and was agreed to by all the Arab states, including Syria. And it was the first time that the Arab world took note of the existence of Israel as a state, with a territorial definition to it. And and cleverly so, I think, to get it passed, without mentioning the name Israel. It simply said that all states in the region have the right to exist and prosper and so on. That plan led, I think, along with Madrid and other subsequent developments, to the Arab Peace Initiative of 2002, which is a very comprehensive, as Mr. Novik said, term of reference for peace. But I think it is more than that. It envisions what peace is like, what it means for the Arabs and the Israelis in normalization, in diplomatic exchange, in trade, etc., end of hostilities, borders defined, capitals recognized, refugee problem resolved by mutual consent on both sides. All of these issues are end games to a negotiation, rather than themselves being negotiating tools. So from that context, I think the value of it is that it is still adhered to by the Arab League and the Arab countries. My view is that it is irreplaceable. And therefore, I think it would be unwise and simply unimaginable for the Arab world to simply say at one stage in the near future, or perhaps even in the far future, that we give up on the Arab Peace Initiative. What is the alternative? And this is something that no critic of the Arab Peace Initiative has managed to present to the Arab world. So if the alternative is war, then who's waging war, and in what means and by what capacity? Is the alternative simply continued negotiation as we've seen in the last 20 years? Well, where has that gotten us? It's gotten us nowhere. And as the Secretary said, everybody knows what the solution is. Just put it on the ground. One thing I will comment on in the Secretary's presentation was his statement that from his memoirs that if he was not going to deal with the Middle East problem when he was first appointed to as Secretary of State. This is a luxury that American Secretaries of State and American presidents and American officials can afford to think about and to try to achieve in one form or another. We in the area cannot afford to have that luxury. For us, the Middle East issue, the Palestinian problem, and the Israeli presence in our midst are day-to-day factors. We see them in the news, in television, and written commentary, in public fora like this one, for example. So for us, it's a matter of life and death. There are lives that are being blood being spilled and lives being spent in the process. So we cannot afford to ignore what is happening in Palestine. And I hope that with people, hopefully, like Secretary Baker and former President Bush, and subsequent American leaders who made commitments to the Middle East resolution of the problem there, that somebody can simply put it in place. We don't need process anymore. We don't need plans anymore. We've had a horse load of plans and rhetoric and jargon and slogans. Simply just come and say, this is what we're going to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's it.
Thank you. Highness Nimrod wants to make a comment.
Yeah, I take issue just with one minor element in your equation, and I think
you can take issue with more elements if you like.
No, but I agree. But I do agree, and I hope that you will agree with my interpretation.
Yes.
You suggested that U.S. Secretary of State or presidents or administrations can choose to look away and leave the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli dispute. Well, it's always very presumptuous for an Israeli to come and suggest a perspective. So I'm just doing it from a very parochial perspective. Looking back over the last 20 years or whatever, yes, the U.S. can choose to look away, but then the Middle East tends to show up on its doorstep one way or another.
Agreed. That's what I said.
That's true.
Basically.
So you both agree?
Absolutely.
One point.
We can sign a peace treaty now. You want
to? Oh, this is going to be a historic conference.
May I?
Yes, please, Nabil.
I was invited by King Abdullah, who was then Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, after the Thomas Friedman article was published, which is the first indication of the Arab Peace Initiative. And I spent a long time in Riyadh working with him on the development of the idea. And I was with him in the representing Palestine in the summit meeting in Beirut, where this was approved fully. He was absolutely delighted in my first meeting when he heard that 70% of the Israeli public approved of the peace process he's suggesting. And this was really happily astonishing me, that he cared very much that 70% of the Israeli public supported the Arab peace proposal that he was making for peace. And I believe that was an opportunity, I hope not totally lost, but it's an opportunity to break through, not on the form, not on the structure, but on the core idea of making peace between Arabs and Israelis. Because I think that was some very important aspect of Madrid, that it brought all the Arabs plus the Palestinians and the Israelis. Brought also the important countries of the world. The idea of the Quartet, I think, was in Madrid, because it was the Americans, the Soviets then, the Europeans, and the role of the United Nations. All were there. It makes it easier for the Palestinians also to make progress, that their Arab brothers are there, included in the process. And particularly if there is an Arab proposal on the table, like King Abdullah's proposal for peace. I want to use the opportunity also to mention something else that Mr. Baker mentioned in his speech about the requirement of unity between the Palestinians for any coming negotiations to succeed. And I agree 100%. And I think there is a link here between the Palestinians, Fatah and Hamas, and what's going on in the Arab awakening or the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring is basically composed of nationalists and Islamists. I mean, we've just seen the first example of it in Tunisia. I mean, in Tunisia, an Islamist got 40% of the members of parliament, although he got only 25% of the popular vote. But this is usually the democratic game that you have to play with on the assignment of constituencies and how they make a relevance between the percentage of popular vote and the percentage of seats you gain. But fine. He went out and made a statement, Mr.